What's up, everybody? This is Albert, pronouns he, him, his, and we are back with another video for this project, Raising Souls. And so this book we're going to be talking about today is No Ashes in the Fire by Darnell Moore. It's another very good read that I recommend anyone to read, because this one isn't an academic journal or paper or anything. This is a memoir by a Black Lives Matter activist. And for those who don't know Darnell Moore, he's a Black queer activist. If y'all know about whatever happened in Ferguson with Mike Brown, there was a lot of Black Lives Matter protests that happened in that specific time. And Darnell, he and other Black Lives Matter activists, they organized rides to Ferguson from all over the United States to protest on behalf of Michael Brown. And he's also a journalist, wrote for I think The Guardian, The Nation, Huffington Post, and all of that. And he's also into politics. He was in Cory Booker's LGBT advisory council or something, in commission, and did a lot of work for pride events and everything of that sort. And this is pretty much him reflecting on his life and how he got into being an unapologetic Black and queer liberationist, womanist activist. And this book, it has 8 chapters, but there are prologues and an epilogue. And I feel like this is gonna be a short video. It's not gonna be as long because it's very just on Darnell remembering his life. And the prologue, it starts off with him reflecting on a picture of himself when he was a little child, smiling, and how he tries to think about how to maintain that joy throughout his life, how he go back to being the carefree child that he was in that picture. And especially considering he lived in Camden, New Jersey, which is conditions of racism, classism, and homophobia pretty much shaped his life, because Camden is a very poor Black community, and he tries to thinking about how to be in a constant state of freedom ever since he was in that ever since he looked at the picture. And then, let me see if there was a quote. Yeah, he said, so many of us forget we once smiled big before others attempted to snatch our smile away. So how to maintain that smile considering the system of oppressions that he had to face. And so we're going to start with chapter 1. So this is his background. He lived in a household of 11 people, and it was a 3-bedroom house. So thinking about 11 people, 3 bedrooms, and I don't think everyone in that house is his siblings. I think he was raised in his grandparents' house, because his mom gave birth to him as a teenager. So that's the living situation that they were in, and he lived with his aunts and uncles and stuff like that. And he was the youngest in that household. And he talked about looking back at the situations now that they got into. He didn't even realize that he was poor. So that he talked about the unconditional love that he got and the circumstances that they faced. But he remembered how certain things made him conscious about racism and stuff like that. Because Camden, New Jersey, there is a trash incinerator in that community. And he talked about how environmental racism impacted his life, because he smelled the trash incinerator. He smelled the mercury and everything. And I know Baltimore, there was protests about a trash incinerator that were going on that was going to be in the Black and Latinx community, and it was the same thing in Camden, New Jersey. And Then he talked about his family history. He talked about his great grandmother L. and he talked about how hard it was for her to have a to maintain home ownership because because even it's the same thing because his great grandmother came out of teenage pregnancy, and she had to grow up early. She didn't have the chance to have a childhood, and so she bought homes, I think, as young as in her early her late teens. And she was a domestic worker, so she had to work a low wage job, but she was able to make all these strides possible, have a family and have grandchildren, and able to see her great grandchildren. And he talked about how much that is beautiful, despite the oppression that she had to having to succumb to racism, misogyny, and classism. And he talked about how Darnell was born right after Camden had this uprising, and there was an uprising because of this man named Horatio Jamirez, a Latinx man, and he was harassed by police officers in Camden in 1971. And then he was in the hospital through his wounds, and it eventually led to his death because he was hurt so bad, and that there were protests and stuff like that. So same thing that happened with Ferguson, Baltimore, Minnesota, and everything that's going on right now in the Black Lives Matter movement. So it also talks about, even though Horatio Jamirez isn't black, but he still had to face white supremacy and the violence that comes with it. And he talked about how important it was to have that sense of solidarity from Black people contributing to that uprising. And that was it for chapter 1. It was very short. I don't know if I had quotes that stuck out to me in this chapter. Yeah, he was pretty much talking about Horatio's unresponsive body was a consequence of a state instrument working as it should, in a way that most law enforcement bodies do, functioning always as a tool of white supremacist desires to protect white property and patrol non-white bodies. Black cities in the United States have always been on fire. So he was talking about the looting and the violence that was going on because of the uprising. And he was talking about, even though you see the fires in those uprisings, Black communities were always in fire. We were always succumbing to the fire that was racism and white supremacy. And he said there is nothing good that comes from hiding the truth. And the uprising exposed the truth and stuff like that. So he pretty much talked about radical politics there. And chapter 2 is titled Ripples. So this one was talking about his father, and he had a memory of his father when he was a child, and when his father bathed him and taught him how to take his own bath and do his own showers and stuff like that. And he was talking about his father's hands and how those hands can be used for care, positivity, and helpfulness. Because he also talked about how his father not only bathed them, but also taught him how to swim. And he was talking about the situations that his father had to go through, because he was a teenage father, and he was working class, so he had to figure out how to navigate the society he lived in. And he talked about his mom's pregnancy, the stigma that came with Black teenage pregnancy, because there was always that stigma that comes with it, because she gave birth to Darnell at 16, and she talked about the lack of government assistance that was going on, and Reagan era politics came in with welfare queens, and the stereotype that working class black women have to they had to embrace. And he also talked about how his father was incarcerated, so the life of being a child of an incarcerated parent, and how he had to visit his father being so young. And he was talking about the importance of familial care, and like I said, he didn't even know that he was poor, and because he talked about how the love was so rich. And then he talked about how one time his well, not even one time, he talked about the domestic violence that his father put the family through. So his father typically beat his mom, like even threw her to the ground. Trigger warning, domestic violence, sorry. And she'd be on the floor, and he'd be kicking, and it was just so brutal. And there was this one time Darnell tried to call his family members. Granted, he didn't call the police, which was fascinating, but he called his aunts, his uncles and grandparents. And his father left before they came, after he finished beating his mom. And then the family member, the relatives came and asked what happened, and his mom just denied was coddling his father from the abuse that she suffered. And then his mom abused Darnell. So because there's already this idea that his father isn't good enough, because it was a teenage pregnancy, and there was a stigma behind that, and she wanted to prove that his father is worthy of being a father and being in the household, which it was very toxic. So it was very hectic. And he talked about the trauma that his father's hands been doing, because there was another incident where his father broke into the house and beat his mom, and then Darnell tried to stand up for himself and protect his mom, and then his dad beat him. So he was talking about going back to the complexities of hands, how the person who taught you how to bathe yourself and teach you how to swim also hurt you, and put trauma into your life and everything you thought about a black man should be. And thank God Darnell tried not to he sees his father as being a bad influence, and he tries his best not to have the same image as his father. And then it eventually then he fast forwarded to his father passing away, because his father was incarcerated because he beat his mom and domestic violence and everything. But he came back. But he eventually got out of prison, and then he died. And Darnell tried to reckon, and it was actually when he was about to write this book that his father passed away. So he was talking about how if his father wouldn't have died, the story would have been, he would have portrayed his father differently. But he also eulogized his father. So he talked about he tried to give his father some grace, even though he got trauma from the beatings and the violence that he put in the household. So it's pretty much talking about how he's trying to learn from what he's trying to learn from his father, since his father is no longer on earth. And it's a reconciliation process that he was going through. And let me see if I got quotes from that. And I don't know. Yeah. He said, Care does not look like police patrolling blighted neighborhoods in search of people who fit the description of the assumed criminal to fill up jail cells and meet quotas, both built on the false premise that Black people are more prone to violence. So he was talking about how Camden was over-policed, and I think he was talking about how he didn't call the police when his father beat his mom, so he was calling the family. And he said, instead, care looks like neighbors passionately intervening to ensure the safety of people they know and strangers they don't, who have been assailed by police, many times for no reason other than the color of their skin. Sorry. All right, and that is the end of chapter 2. And then chapter 3 is titled Magic. And he was talking about inadequate and inequitable funding and education because he was in Camden public schools, and he was put into he was very smart in school. He got the highest grades, the highest test scores. And there was this program called the Academically Talented, which I say is kind of like gifted and talented programs that are in that PG County has. I don't know. I think other schools had them. But he got to the principal's office and tried to convince the principal to put him in the Academically Talented program. And he got his wish. So he was a good he would say, I think he was talked about being a lawyer and how he's good at arguing with people. And he talked about the property taxes that were in schools. So he was talking about how academically talented programs, there's only a selected few of students that can partake in that program, and how it's not fully resourced to the kids in other schools, because the academically talented kids, they get teachers that are more secure, and a lot of them were white teachers, so they probably get better funding in those programs than the programs that they tried to initiate. And after that, he talked about bullies, and he had a lot of moments, and there was a lot of bullying in school. So the title of the book is No Ashes in the Fire. So he was talking about this one incident. It was some homophobic slurs that were spewed at him, and it was a gang of boys, and they punched him. And when he was on his way home from school, they beat him, and it was so brutal that one of the boys got a bottle of gasoline, poured it on Darnell, and was about to light a match. So Darnell could have died, but thankfully the wind that day was so strong that it blew the candle and the light. So Darnell and the boy didn't know how to light a match and stuff like that. So luckily Darnell survived that day. And he talked about having to go to school every day, waking up knowing those bullies were going to be there at school, and who knows what events would have occurred. And I think he before that, he went to he started reckoning the moments of bullying that he spewed out, because he was a bully too. And he was talking about the root of bullying was envy. So he was jealous of some feminine boys and stuff like that, some boys that were intelligent, even some disabled boys. And it wasn't as brutal as the bullying that he went through, but he was talking about verbal abuse and stuff like that, how he thought about the harm he caused the other kids at school, because kids can be very terrible and mean. But he also thought about the parents and what kind of lessons they put on their children, and how children are conditioned and socialized to do certain things. And he talked about the courage that he went through, how it motivated him to go harder in his studies. And he actually applied to a private school all by himself successfully. And for some reason, his family went along with it. Like, I don't know how to feel about that, but he was able to get the funding for this specific private school because he feel like he could get more from a school that's actually treated better than the school that he was in. And he was able to do that, which is interesting. And then he talked about the perspectives of homophobic bystanders, and it was on pages 91 to 93. He was talking about how it was fast forward to a time when he's grown up, how he went to that same train he took when he got to that private school, and how there was this man he encountered that said some homophobic slurs to him, like the F word, and how people in the other train, they weren't standing up for Darnell. There was it was complicity and just bystanding tolerance. And he talked about how he thought why these people aren't doing anything, and he eventually came to the conclusion that they probably believe the same thing, and how homophobia is normalized. And he just came to reckon that society he has to live with as an unapologetic black queer man. And then chapter 4 is titled Touch. So it was pretty much him pretty much reckoning with his queerness, how he got to come to terms and accepting with it. And he had a very intimate moment with a childhood friend, and they were 9 years old, both of them. So I think they were watching some HBO. They were watching HBO, and I don't know what TV show it was, but it was a sex scene that was going on, and him and his childhood friend, I think both of them were 9 years old, and they try to imitate the sex scenes, which is how, and then he talked about how much he was yearning for homosexual desires after that. So Terrence was his childhood friend, and then he was talking about how he had to practically give himself sex education at that moment, because there wasn't homosexual sex education. Sex education tends to be heteronormative. And how the HIV and AIDS epidemic was also going around when he was learning sex education. And then he learned about educating yourself. So he learned about Joseph Beam, and this black queer man who passed away of AIDS. He's an activist. And Essex Hemphill, who was a poet during the AIDS epidemic, and he also passed away from AIDS. And he was talking about HIV and AIDS stigma that queer black men had to go through, and how history doesn't teach us about black queer people. There's this erasure that black queer people throughout history. For example, Bayard Rustin, who helped Martin Luther King organize the March on Washington, who was a queer black man that a lot of people don't know about. There was the Harlem Renaissance, which was a lot of black LGBTQ people contributed to arts, film, paintings, literature during that time, and other moments of history that Stonewall, people don't know that a black trans woman tried to riot against police, and that's how we got pride events and stuff like that. Marsha P. Johnson, for those who don't know. And then he talked about his other romances with boys, Jason and Billy were other people that he had partnerships with. And Darnell, he was down low, but so he kept a lot of these relationships were secrets. And he still had girlfriends and stuff like that, so he was able to navigate being a masculine presenting person. And he talked about the carelessness that black queer people go through because of HIV and AIDS. There was a lack of research because of governments and Reagan not giving funding for HIV and AIDS research, and how HIV and AIDS was propagandized as punishment for gay people, and thinking as that's God's punishment for people that are queer. And he talked about how even through having to succumb to that stigma, he tries to be resilient in the pleasure that he loved. And it was an unlovable pressure that was given to him because of the stigma from HIV and AIDS. And let me see if I could find that. Yeah, he said, I maneuvered through my days smiling, even as I suffocated in a world that refused to let me breathe. So he talked about how he's trying not to let those stigmas deter him from getting the pleasure and love that he yearned for. And this is a paragraph that he said, I never expressed the full range of emotions I felt. For many black boys and girls who are attracted to the same sex, black queer life is a life of solitary confinement. Love didn't feel quite like love because I couldn't speak it out loud. Unlike some black teens who had friends, family members, and other adults to share secrets with or to ask questions, I had no one. The type of love I wanted to experience didn't seem to exist for others, and not having counsel... Sorry, the power was out. That was scary. And I had no one. The type of love I wanted to experience didn't seem to exist for others, and not having counsel for examples or the safety and freedom to express my longings at home and at school meant that I spent many days desiring freedom from captivity. I imagined the questions I wanted family members to ask. I also imagined my responses. Who is that cute boy you were with? You seem to brighten up whenever he is around. What do you love about him? Does he make you smile? Does he make you laugh? Do you feel safe? Yes, 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 I would respond. Freedom. Because his family members didn't even ask if he was gay or anything. But he talked about how heteronormativity gives heterosexual people this privilege to be able to love out loud. And talking about PDA and stuff like that, how queer people don't get those luxuries. And he talked about trying to it would have been nice if he was able to have that type of love. And he said, if loneliness and rejection are the worst deaths, I had died many times before. So he was talking about even though there was this stigma and terror that queer people had to face during the HIV and AIDS epidemic, how we should still be worthy of love. And then he said, black boys and men are still going to parks. They are searching for an embrace and sex with another man or woman. The butterflies that dance in the stomach when a crush says hello. Relief from estrangement, pleasure, comfort, and so much else people across the spectrum of sexualities are in search of. Black same-sex love is revolutionary because we must first convince ourselves we are deserving of receiving and giving what has been denied for us for so long. And that was very powerful. And he said, we've been denied love, and some of us have sought out what we could to fill the gaping wells drained dry by a society that taught us to hate ourselves. But like cunning magicians, many of us have learned to break ourselves out of our cages, even when those attempting to master our lives keep fervent hold of the keys. So I think that's a beautiful way to say that black queer people also deserve love and care, even with all this oppression that they had to go through. And then chapter 5 is titled Run. So, Moore was talking about Black urban life in 1980s and 1990s. So the tough on crime and war on drugs era that he was referencing. You can look into my new Jim Crow video with Michelle Alexander that went into more depth about the drug war. And he was pretty much referencing that. And he was talking about the experience of being down low, but also have queer friends. Because he had queer friends when he was young, but he wasn't out. He was still down low and in the closet, for those who don't know the slang. And he was just talking about how beautiful it was to see people being unapologetically themselves, and he saw that through his friends, which was Ramik, Tariq, and Dre, I think it was their names. Yeah. And then he was talking about another sexual encounter with this man named Sean. And Sean was actually one of his friends' crushes or boyfriends. So they were spending a night at his friend's house, and the friend and the boyfriend were there too. So Darnell and his friend's boyfriend they were sharing a room, and then one thing led to another, so it was messy. But Darnell talked about how much he enjoyed the sex, and eventually his friend was hurt because he had a crush on the boyfriend, and he was talking about the sense of shame because of how he felt because I think it was his first very intimate and passionate same-sex sex that he was participating in. And he talked about the sense of shame that he went through because of the stigma that for homosexual people, and how he felt like it was he alienated himself. And he also talked about how I think his family didn't have enough money to continue being in a private school, so he eventually came back to the public high school, and talked about applying to college and having aspirations in life, career-wise, what did he wanted to do and stuff like that. So he talked about the environment in Newark, New Jersey, and Seton Hall University, which is a Roman Catholic whites private school that he enrolled in. And he talked about being a Black person in a PWI in a Black city. So that is pretty much my experience at Towson University, which is a PWI, but it's near Baltimore, and it shows you there's a racial economic line, which is York Road, which Towson is part of, but there's this division and segregation that is going on. So he was also talking about how Newark, New Jersey, and Seton Hall University is another microcosm in the United States. And he talked about having microaggressions from having white teachers and white students, white classmates and stuff like that. And then he talked about how finding a sense of community with the other Black classmates, being in part of Black organizations, and pretty much coming into more terms with his Blackness. He got more radical and became more politically active. And during his years in undergrad, and how there was this incident in the bathroom when he was going to go into the bathroom, and he was about to fall, and he didn't know what was going on. It was all a blur to him. But then he realized it felt like he was stabbed in his chest, but there were no stabbings that were going on. So it eventually turned out he had a heart attack. So he was also talking about how scary it was to have that moment, because he thought he was going to die. And he was young. He was talking about how his family, he has a long lineage of family members that had heart disease and heart attacks. And he learned that this is just something that a lot of his family members had to go through. And he was talking about this another relationship he had with this guy named Day during college, and there were rumors that were circulating that he was going through AIDS because he had to take medical leave off from a semester. And there were rumors going around the school that he was going through HIV and AIDS because people know he had a boyfriend. But he talked about how much he didn't care. Like, I'm going through a crisis right now. I shouldn't care what other people be thinking about me. And he was talking about also about being sexually fluid in college, because he also had a girlfriend before he came into more terms with his sexuality, and how him and his girlfriend, he came out to her and she was fine with it, because it was interesting because they had threesomes and stuff like that. So it was a fascinating story. It was unique. And yeah, he pretty much talked about being authentic and unapologetic with oneself. And I don't know if I highlighted anything in that chapter, but it was pretty much, he was going through a crisis. Yeah, he said, those who feel undesirable and worthy of death in a state that gives you no reason to believe you have a right to live tend to move quickly to accommodate those desires. And he didn't want to be a statistic. He don't want the oppression to continue its message. And I don't know if that was it. Yep, that was it. So chapter 6, which was Unbecoming, title Unbecoming. So this was, I would say, my favorite chapter. And trigger warning, there was going to be mention of suicide, death, and stuff like that. So he went back home to take care of his heart attack. And he was talking about living and stuff like that. And he was about to take these pills, and he didn't come out. He was going through a sea of despair and intense depression at the time because he wasn't able to do much. He couldn't move too much because of his condition. He had to stay on a couch for a plethora of days and weeks and months. And then he eventually got to a place where he got better, and there was this friend named Warren, I think it was his name. So he got baptized, and then he found a new meaning of life. He felt like it was a rebirth of himself. So thankfully he got to a place where he knew that love is still out there for him, and life can be worth living. And then he was talking about his friend Ursula. He was friends with in college, and he got to appreciate Black women more. So he was talking about unlearning patriarchy at the time, and how he realized how much he benefited from it, even though he understood that domestic violence and stuff like that from his father, that's misogyny, but he didn't even realize how he himself can benefit and perpetuate misogyny. And he had this beautiful paragraph on page 160. He said he was pretty much appreciating the Black women's lives. He said, Black girls are expected to mother Black boys who are and aren't their sons, and Black boys, queer or straight, often demand our mothers, sisters, friends, and partners meet and even exceed that expectation. All boys are taught that the world is theirs, but Black boys learn early on that the world they are required to rule is the home, the place often sustained by the visible and invisible labor of Black women and girls we share homes and relationships with. The home is likened to a kingdom Black boys are expected to provide for, fight to protect, and lord over. Outside the home, the streets Black boys navigate are controlled by the state and the wealthy, and Black boys' freedoms are restricted and policed. So he was talking about how Black boys, they have the freedom to go outside, but black girls, it's normalized that they take care of the household. They don't get a chance to be children sometimes. And he's talking about also that how white men, they create patriarchy, and then black men and boys, they talked about they want that patriarchy, just not the racism and stuff like that. He said white boys are raised to rule the home, the streets, the banks, the courts, the legislative halls, the church, the academy, the medical industry, the military, and the country. They are granted permission to travel through the world, never questioning their need to control others' bodies and properties, never reflecting on their incessant demand for respect and entitlement, never removing themselves from the center of the public imagination. Black boys are taught to replicate the white boy game, but eventually they realize the game was never set in their favor. Some then do all they can to manipulate the contest by trying to beat the game masters in a match best forfeited. If the country cannot be ruled, the home damn sure can, which includes attempts at ruling the lives and bodies of our mothers, sisters, partners, nieces, and aunties. I play the game over and over again and have wounded black girls and women like Ursula in the process. I wounded myself not realizing that patriarchy, this rain, male dominance takes aim at girls and women and the humanity of men too. So he was talking about how patriarchy, men don't even realize and stuff like that. And then he talked about more of a reckoning with black women that he hurt in his life, like his mom and his sisters, how he expected them to do certain things, and he wasn't able to reciprocate, and he couldn't for some reason reciprocate that energy. And I think that was a reckoning that he healed. And then he talked about being queer and having an attachment to the church, because homophobia can be seen as a sin in the church sometimes. And he talked about how he got into ministry because he also went to seminary and theological schools, and he was talking about moments where he tried to pray the gay away and stuff like that, but that made him even more hurt, and he found more healing and liveliness when he just accepted the fact that he was a queer man. And he talked about the importance of community, because he arranged a gospel choir when he was in Seton Hall, and he talked about the choir members that he was with, and some of them came out to him and gave him the affirmation and community that he needed. So that's how he just accepted his queer identity, which I think it was amazing. And I don't know if yeah, I didn't get anything. So we're almost done, y'all. Chapter 7 and chapter 8. We're on chapter 7, in which is titled Return. So he was talking about he was getting away from home at one point because he didn't feel seen. He didn't feel his authentic self. He needed a breath of fresh air, basically. And then he was going to the bus, and he remembered the bus driver, and he remembered his voice, his hands, which was interesting when he talked about complexity of hands. So it ended up being his father. So he was talking about reckoning with his father and stuff like that, and how his father's lack of presence and hurt him, and his father didn't even apologize or anything. So they were talking about how each other were going through, how everyone was doing. And Darnell graduated from Seton Hall at the time. His father talked about how much he was proud of him. He bragged about Darnell becoming the first in the House family to graduate from college. And Darnell said, even though he appreciated that achievement, how he lacked support from his dad. So he didn't really know how to get in terms with his feelings. He didn't have the words. But he was like, so you're not going to talk about the hurt that you caused our family? And And he said all that internally and mentally. He didn't even say that to his dad. But he eventually got to his destination. And then his dad asked for some money because you figure people who are incarcerated, it's hard for them to have a job and maintain a job, that they probably need familial support. And Darnell gave him the money, but he was like, wow, you really did all that to me, and this is what you asked for? This is all you can offer? So it was a process for Darnell to go through. And then rewind back to the chapter, reckoning with his father's eventual death. And then Darnell, after he graduated from college, he was in this program called Urban Promise, which was a nonprofit. I think it was similar to like AmeriCorps or something like that. And then they go to schools. You have roommates. You're provided housing, and then you go to certain schools to tutor and help with personal and professional development for kids in public schools. And I think it was a middle school at this time. And he was talking about the white people that he was with, and he's talking about his white roommates. He's talking about how he didn't his interactions with white people, and how he didn't really get into that deep with connection of white people until he got into this program. And he was talking about the intentions and purpose of white people and these nonprofit industries, and how white people just go to these industries so they can feel good about their whiteness, so that this isn't something that they have to reckon with because of the situations because of racism. And he was talking about white savior complex and stuff like that. And then he got into teaching. Since he got into more education, he then saw teaching as an opportunity. And then he was talking about his experiences being a teacher. And there was this one student, his name is Thomas, and how he was pretty much the outcast student, the rebel. And he went into this professional development workshop where he realized that positions that students take, and Thomas was in the back of the room. And if anyone who gets this academic message that took advice that to sit in the front of the classroom, it tends to be students that perform academically better than students that are sitting in the back. So Darnell took that message and then put more attention into Thomas, because before, Thomas couldn't even write one sentence. He was always throwing things, retaliating against his wishes. But once Darnell took that advice and put theory into practice, Thomas was doing better. He was able to write 5-paragraph essays. And then Darnell talked about how he saw himself in Thomas, because Darnell wasn't academically doing well in college, but he was doing a lot better in high school, elementary, primary education. So he was talking about how Darnell gets to be himself through Thomas and be in support of Thomas. And then he was talking about the preparation and the eventual death of his grandpa George, who was his maternal grandma, his mom's father. And he was talking about how his grandfather told him that he was about to that he has to go through treatment for prostate cancer. And Darnell was the first to get this news, so his grandfather was being strategic in letting get the information. And then he gave Darnell the advice that you're going to have to take care of your grandmother, so prepare for that. And I don't think his grandma even knew that his grandfather had prostate cancer and had to go through treatment, and Darnell was the first to know, so that was interesting. And Darnell talked about how his grandpa George was the role model that his father was never able to be for him. So he was talking about how his grandpa also contributed to Darnell living like they weren't poor, even though they were poor. How his grandfather was organizing a tent in their yard and stuff like that. So he got to remember moments of happiness and growth through his grandfather, and he looked up to him, and he talked about the moment he was in his deathbed, his grandfather, and so many in the family were there. Darnell got the news and through his mom, and attended and went to the hospital, and how when his grandpa was in his deathbed and he died, Darnell just laid on his chest and remembered how soft and warm his chest was when he was younger, and he remembered the care that his family gave him, that unconditional and rich love that he got in that household, and it gave him more reason to live. So I found that to be a beautiful section of the chapter. And then finally, chapter 8 is titled Lessons. So he was talking about eventually coming out to his mom, and he was roommates with this guy named Shane, who it was actually his boyfriend, who he talked about the experiences being with Shane, how they had to live and being in the closet, and then Shane motivated him that you have to live in your truth and stuff like that. And then he pretty much talked about preparing to come out to his mom. It was this page, page 210. And then when he came out to his mom said, "I already knew." So it was like, I'm your mother. I know this is probably information that you had to deal with, and when you're ready to let me know, it's your information to give. And Darnell felt so loved at that moment. He felt so validated. He felt like he won the lottery, and this was beautiful. He said, "I felt as if I had received my freedom papers, as if I had been imprisoned in a suffocating cell for 28 years or 10,220 days, and my mother had come along with the keys to unlock the cage. I realized, however, I had been holding the keys all along. I merely shared them with my mother. She was there, sitting opposite me, loving me, because I invited her in. She accepted the invitation, and we both were changed as a result." And then he talked about all the messages that he got through because of the black households, and how single mothers, they're destroying the black household and not the men that are leaving them. And he talked about how they eventually become gay and stuff like that, the children that single mothers had to raise, and he talked about how that stigma and stuff like that. So knowing that his mom loved him despite his queer identity, it gave him, he felt like he won the lottery, and I felt that it was beautiful. And then he talked about his romance with Shane, and how they had their living situations, and how there was this moment where him and Shane were arguing, that Darnell swung, but Shane dodged Darnell's swinging him, and then Darnell broke down because he realized he was becoming his father. So he was, and then he tried to make a vow not to do anything, not get in that rage and anger again. So I think he pretty much advised therapy and anger management at that point, or something like that. And he pretty much tried to make the vow not to be like his father, and continue unlearning misogyny and misogynist behavior that he was socialized to see as normal. And then he talked about, after coming out to his mom, how unapologetically and and prideful. He became more in his queerness. Like, he was open with his queerness at this point. He was talking about going to Pride and stuff like that, and how even being an open queer man, you still had to unlearn anti-queerness and confront bigotry and anti-queerness. And he was talking about this black lesbian teenager who got killed by a black man that sexually advanced her, and she refused his advances. She was a teenager. I think she was 15, and then she eventually got killed. So her name was Sakia Gunn. I just learned about this through this book. So talks about even though black people go through all this violence, you can't not fighting for all black queer lives. You're not fighting for all black lives. And I think that's literally how you should go through advocacy and anti-racism, and knowing that there are black LGBTQ people that also had to go through violence. And she talked about the police violence that queer people go through. So Stonewall, for example. And I would say the Orlando Pulse shooting that happened in Florida, and it was the largest mass shooting at that time. And talk about how we need to tackle homophobia and confront these systems of oppression that allow people to be fueled in hatred. And then he was talking about when he was doing this speech, and I think it was a Pride speech, this LGBT speech at Newark City Hall. And there was this old man that said the F word to him in the audience, and how Darnell was holding himself back. And I think the man eventually got escorted out. So he was talking about the importance of community love and stuff like that. So not having to retaliate to everything. And he was pretty much talking about the importance of activism and advocacy, and even fighting for LGBTQ youth. And there was a moment where he was in a town meeting, and it was an issue regarding LGBT youth, and how parents at the time, they were talking about how it was going against their religious beliefs and stuff like that. And Darnell was emphasizing the importance that there are children and they deserve our love and safety. So that's how we got into activism and stuff like that, and get into more spaces where he can advocate on behalf of black LGBT youth. And then chapter 8 is done, but we'll get into the epilogue. The epilogue is talking about the Ferguson, Missouri, so 2014, and how he arranged the rise to Ferguson with Patrisse Cullors, if I'm not mistaken, from Black Lives Matter. And he was talking about the importance of radical love, and how that moment in Ferguson, it was a sense of radical love because so many black people were loving Michael Brown and trying to fight against systemic racism, and how pretty much the fight to carry on the revolution and stuff like that. And talked about how try to get that community that he got when he was in that household of 11, how important it is to have that community for all black people and all oppressed peoples, and fight against racism, sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, classism, fatphobia, and all that stuff. So that's it, y'all. So thank you for listening to me on this. This is the first queer literature that is part of this project, so check this out. I highly recommend this book. Recommend me any more texts that y'all find interesting. Follow my Instagram. My personal one is @intellectualbert. I'll put it in the description box below. And my reading list is @RaisinSouls. So I'll post this on @RaisinSouls on Instagram. And thank y'all for tuning in. I hope y'all take care. And love all black people, love all oppressed peoples of the world that had to go through state sanctioned violence, and the conditions that capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism had to put on us. So thank y'all.